Josh McKelvin. Primary is fast approaching, and Congressman Frank Ginta liking his chances more and more by the day. But in an election season like none other, are people paying attention to anything beyond the top of the ticket? Congressman Ginta is my first guest this morning. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you.
Yeah, so let's start there. Let's start with the top of the ticket. A lot has gone on with Donald Trump. What's your take of what we're seeing post RNC, where a lot of people were cautiously optimistic that he's going to hit a disciplined stride?
Yeah, now we're beyond both of the conventions. I think most people appreciate and understand that Donald Trump is a unique type of candidate, tends to shoot from the hip, says what he wants to say. The reality is what he should be doing and focusing on are the issues that matter to middle-class families and focusing his attention on the challenges that Hillary Clinton has now that she is the formal nominee. If he does that, I think he will continue to build on what was an impressive primary win.
Do you believe you were an early supporter of him? That hasn't wavered, or has it? Has that started changing?
No, it hasn't. It hasn't. Look, you know, I'm a team player, and he is the Republican nominee. If he asks for my advice, I'll tell him to focus on the issues, focus on the things that matter to people here in New Hampshire, economic issues, the challenges with Obamacare, and to have him focus on the differences between he and Hillary Clinton. Just this week, she said whether it was a mistake or not, she said she was going to raise taxes on the middle class in Nebraska, and everybody cheered. Now, I don't know if that was a mistake or if that's really where her heart is, but those are the things we should be talking about. The president's deal with Iran, $400 million in cash. Those are the things that I think public policy-wise really matter when it comes to November.
But you're in an election, and you point to these things, and a lot of people are saying that's what he should be talking about. He could win by focusing on Hillary Clinton, who, pundits will say, possibly one of the most flawed presidential candidates in modern history, yet we're not talking about those kinds of things. How are you concerned about how that will impact you and the rest of Republicans on down the ticket?
No, I don't worry so much about impact of the top of the ticket. Look, in New Hampshire, you have to have a grassroots operation. You've got to go door to door and meet voters, no matter if you're Republican, Democrat, if you're running for the first time or the 10th time. That's the kind of campaign that I run. When the name comes up, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, I listen to what constituents have to say, and then I focus on what can I do to continue to help you as a middle-class American, as someone who is in a stagnant economy, who may not have access to affordable health care. What can I do as your representative to Washington to make your life better?
Iran nuclear deal, that would have been major news in any other cycle and any other day, and yet it's second to Donald Trump, maybe third to a sidebar on Donald Trump. First, your take on what the Wall Street Journal report revealed, and second, how big of a deal is this?
Well, I was shocked when I found out about it, not just as a legislator, but as an American. The fact that it appears to be a $400 payment, for lack of a better term, to Iran. Now, the White House has claimed that that's not accurate, but essentially when you're providing cash payment as opposed to even an electronic transfer, just raises questions. So should it matter? Yes, it should. I suspect when the summer month of August is completed, Congress is back in session in September, people start to focus in on policy. I suspect that this will come up not just during the presidential debates, but there will be issues for the Oversight Committee, both in the House and the Senate, to consider.
So what should the question be, though, moving forward? Because the president this week had a press conference more focused on success against ISIS, but this came up, and he said, you know what, look, we told you about this in January. This is nothing new here. So why are we talking about it now?
As a member of Congress, I don't feel like I was ever notified of a cash payment that was anticipated to be made in the middle of the summer, number one. Number two, I'm not sure what authorization the president felt he had, because it certainly, in my view, was not authorized within the Iran deal. If it was, I'd like to see exactly where he's pointing to that specifically states he's allowed to make a $400 cash payment to Iran.
$400 million. And do you believe that, are you convinced, as some are, that this was simply a cash for hostages, a major breach with American?
I'd hope not. But I'd like to hear more from the President of the United States. I certainly hope not, because we have a long-standing policy of not negotiating with terrorists or terrorist states for release of hostages. But I'd like to hear more from the President.
On ISIS, the President said, look, things are working. It's not going to be over soon, but they haven't had a major successful offensive in Iraq and Syria in a full year, while Donald Trump at the RNC said this is spreading everywhere. Where do you fall?
Well, it is spreading everywhere. You have generals on the ground who have communicated that to the president as well as Congress and the public. ISIS is not going well, as the president has described. This is pervasive not just in the region, but now we have cells here in America and in Europe that are constantly attacking and killing people worldwide. I don't think the president has a good handle on how to address ISIS. He needs to be forward-thinking and severe in how he's going to eradicate the threat of ISIS. And this requires leadership from our president immediately, working with our allies. It's just not happening.
Just as important as a plan to move forward is America's approach with the world, according to Admiral Hudson. He used to live here in New Hampshire as the dean of the law school. He spoke at the DNC, and he said the approach that's being taken by the potential next president is so detrimental to the job that generals on the ground have to do because of the posture that's being taken. Does that worry you?
Look, campaigns are what they are, campaigns. Once you are in office, and this happens regardless of what party you're in or what office you're seeking, there's a time for campaigning and there's a time for governing. I feel very confident that whoever the next president is, they're going to deal with ISIS in a manner that is reflective and respectful of the United States policy, as well as bringing our allies together. The fact remains that ISIS is an international threat. Nobody disagrees with that. So the challenge is, how do you eliminate that threat? Right now, what I see in this current president is not the willingness to focus on that threat. I think a Donald Trump would, and I'm confident that as he continues to identify who his cabinet would be, he'll make smart, thoughtful picks that will have sound judgment and sound advice as to how to deal with the threat of ISIS.
Let's talk about the pocketbook. It's obviously still an issue and a big one. Jobs report came out this week, exceeded expectations, kind of undermines the Republican argument that, this is a stagnant economy that's not working and we can do better. How?
Well, the U6 number has us over 10% of unemployment. We've got the lowest labor participation rate in modern history. We're at about 62%. And finally, average weekly wages have been stagnant over a decade. When I go into communities like Dover, Somersworth, Rochester, right here in Manchester, you knock on 10 doors with average middle class families and ask them if they think the economy is doing well, unanimously they're going to say no. They're concerned about their job prospects, they're concerned about their children's job prospects and their grandchildren's job prospects. So 225,000 new jobs is, while that's fine, you need 800,000 jobs per month for the rest of the year just to get back to where we were before this president took office.
Party unity, trying to get to a lot here. Well documented the differences over the FEC thing with you and Kelly Ayotte. Do you need Kelly Ayotte? I mean, do you need to come together with Kelly Ayotte to be successful, both of you, or do you feel like you can part ways with the approach that she's taken on?
Look, I want to see good Republicans win, because I think public policy for good Republicans is much better than our opponents. So I'm happy to work with any Republican who wants to find ways to move the ball on economic growth, on economic development, on reducing our debt and deficit, whether it's Senator Ayotte or anybody else. I'm happy to do that.
Do you think she's running a campaign that's good for the entire ticket?
Well, you have to ask her that. I mean, everyone's got their own different approach on how they're going to campaign. I think she's campaigning hard, and I think she's going door to door and doing a grassroots campaign, and I think she'll surprise a lot of people.
All right, and to wrap this up, the primary is approaching rapidly. You're in a battle with Rich Ashew. You have the name ID, he doesn't. What will be the difference maker, do you believe, come September 13th. Thank you.
Well, I have bold, tested leadership. I have been there. I have actually fought the good fights. I actually delivered a tax cut when I was mayor. I actually cut taxes, actually reduced expenditures, grew the economy, was identified as one of the best places to live by CNN as a result of my leadership. And I've done the same thing in Washington. When I think my party leadership is wrong, I vote against them, whether it's the budget or whether it's the omnibus. But then I also can work with Democrats, including this president, to repeal things like the Cadillac tax, one of his signature issues in the Affordable Care Act. Nobody said that we could get that done, yet we got him to delay it for 2 years. Working on the heroin and opioid crisis, I'm chairman of the Congressional Task Force. So I think there are major differences. I think people appreciate my leadership and my ability to get things done public policy-wise on behalf of New Hampshire and the country, and that's why I'm running and asking for people for their support again on September 13th.
All right, well, thanks for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
It's all happening fast. Good to see you.